Well, hello and welcome to Game Faces coverage of the Premier Division A-grade preliminary final here between Wandin and Monbulk. Gembrook Recreation Reserve looking forward to what should be a thrilling contest between second and third on the ladder. Awesome, there we go. So confirmation of the toss of the coin. Monbulk will have the first centre pass of the game. They will be going to the right-hand side of your screen. Wandin will be going to the left-hand side of your screen. We'll take a look now at the starting lineups for both of these sides. For Wandin, Amalia Blake will start as goal shooter. Kayla Meagher starts as goal attack. Carly Dolphin as wing attack. Maddie Wallmeyer centre. Maddie George as wing defence. Kai Kimpton as goal defence. Ruby Tidd as goalkeeper. On the interchange will be Claudia Semos, Annie Brown and Lauren Spinks. For Monbulk, Perry Reid starts as goal shooter, Steph Ferguson as goal attack, Sophie Stubbs as wing attack, Nicole McDowell will start as centre, Rihanna Kelly will start as wing defence, Grace Scott Thomas as goal defence and Paige Whitworth as goalkeeper. On the interchange will be Georgia Wilson, Taya Barnett and Jen Dewhurst. Don't forget as well, at 2:20pm we do have the footy between Linda Fernie Creek and Wirrialec, also second and third in what should be a crucial clash. That game will also be live and available through the local footy hub and also Yarra Valley FM 99.1. So, of course, preliminary final action. It's do or die. Winner goes through to the grand final. Loser goes home. So, plenty of pressure on both of these sides. Wandin, of course, went out in last year's preliminary final. They lost the grand final 2 years ago. So, they will want to make amends and give themselves another opportunity to win the flag in 2025. Monbulk, they did go out the first week of finals last season, so they'll be quite happy to have gone this far, but they'll want to continue their run and try and book their place in a grand final against Mount Evelyn next week. So it should be an interesting contest. As mentioned, though, Wandin have currently won all three matchups against Monbulk by considerable margins. So they'll definitely take plenty of confidence off of that, but finals can sometimes bring about a different result. So we will see if Monbulk can maybe bring a better result into today's game, make it a little bit closer than what they have so far. So scheduled start time here at Gembrook is 12:00pm, which is not too far away. And if you are just tuning in, it is Monbulk who will take the first centre pass. They'll be going to the right-hand side of your screen. Wandin will be going to the left. And we might even get started a little bit earlier here at Gembrook Recreation Reserve. Both teams are about to break off into positions. So preliminary final action. Winner books their place into the grand final against Mount Evelyn. Loser, well, 2025 will be all but done. As we just wait for both teams to get into position. It'll be Nicole McDowell with the first centre pass. So preliminary final action. It's Wandin versus Monbulk. Nicole McDowell gets things underway. Out wide to Steph Ferguson. And straight away a turnover here. Being forced by Wandin and Maddie Wallmeyer. Kimpton back to Tidd. Short to George. Looks around and comes back to Ruby Tidd. So good start for Wandin already on the counter-attack. George to Wallmeyer. Back to Maddie George, has Kimpton out wide. Decides to retreat to Ruby Tidd and then back to George. We'll go much further this time to Dolphin. Beautifully done though by Scott Thomas, was it? No, in fact it was Rihanna Kelly. So Monbulk to eventually get the ball back in their control. Stubbs. Way too much on the feed. So that'll work out just fine. Tidd to George. Short to Ruby Tidd, onto Wallmeyer, up to Dolphin. Comes back inboard to George. Ruby Tidd and Maddie George once again working in tandem. Much longer this time to Wallmeyer. Back to Maddie George, puts him inside the attacking third to Dolphin. Dolphin, back to Kimpton. And that's a good feed. Kayla Meagher will get a first shot at goal in the preliminary final. And she converts on the second opportunity, so want to get the first against the centre pass. So an early break already for the Dogs. Wallmeyer. Straight away to Dolphin. Waits Meagher. Back to Maddie Wallmeyer. Looks for Amalia Blake. And takes it cleanly. Whitworth has done really well there. Crucial 1-1 victory against Amalia Blake. Goes short to Scott Thomas. She'll come back to Whitworth. As the wind starts to pick up a bit here at Gembrook. Always a bit of a feature here at Gembrook Recreation Reserve. Whitworth eventually gets around Dolphin. Onto McDowell. To Kelly and called for stepping. So Kimpton with ball in hand. Long drive and beautifully done to Wallmeyer. Well weighted in the wind. Tries to come back to Kimpton. Ferguson pulled up for contact, so it comes back to Kai Kimpton. Walmart, Meager. And Walmart just a bit too much on the feed. Comes back into the hands of Paige Whitworth. Whitworth to Scott Thomas, and then McDowell, long drive. George picks it off beautifully. Dolphin back to Matty George, who goes back to Kaylee Dolphin. Kayla Migo with the only goal of the game so far. So Miga lines him up and puts through her second. And Wandin, 2 goals to zip so far, so Monbulk need to respond. Ferguson out wide. Eventually McDowell able to run onto it. Short, nearly picked off by Kimpton. Comes back to McDowell. And into the hands of Perry Reid. Got a bit of contact anyway, and Perry Reid does not convert. Ferguson couldn't take it cleanly off the rebound. Reid did. Eventually gets the first goal for Monbulk, so back to a 1 goal difference, but Wandin still with the early break. Wallmeyer. Dolphin. So Carly Dolphin could feed to Amalia Blake, but decides to go to Kayla Meager instead. We started this game quite well. 3rd goal already. Back to a 2 goal difference for Wandin. Scott Thomas to Stubbs. And Matty George, does she keep it in play? She does, but Stubbs there to pick it off. Ferguson. Could go short to Perry Reid, and she does, and this to get it back to 1 goal. The difference, the wind just plays a bit of havoc there. Kimpton, did she get some contact? She did, there we go. So Wandin with another little victory in defence. Tid short to George. We'll go back to Ruby Tid and then back to Matty George. George for a 3rd time in the passage over the top to Walmart. Nicely done. Moves it on to Dolphin. Dolphin back to George. Right on a measure at the transverse line. Waits and waits. A long one to Meager is a good one as well. Dolphin up against McDowell. Did well. Wants to feed to Amalia Blake. Will come short to Meager, and Dolphin pulled up for stepping. So Monbulk managed to force a turnover. Scott Thomas with ball in hand will come back to Whitworth. Whitworth feigned one way, went the other. Kelly to Scott Thomas, onto Stubbs. Stubbs goes short. Scott Thomas, McDowell, back into the hands of Sophie Stubbs. McDowell puts it up, and eventually Perry Reid accepts it. And more importantly, converts the opportunity back to 1 goal, the difference the way of Monbulk. Wallmeyer. Dolphin, back to George. All the way across to Meager. Meager, back to George. Into the hands of Carly Dolphin. Out wide to Wallmeyer, and Kayla Meager again, who, interestingly, has done all the scoring for Wandin so far. All 4 goals. McDowell. Ferguson. Out wide, into the hands of Stubbs. And here is Perry Reid with a bit of a height advantage on Kai Kimpton, and she gets one back again for Wandin. Sorry, for Monbulk, in fact. So 3 goals to 4. Decent response here from Monbulk after conceding the first with the centre pass. Long drive and straight into the hands of Amalia Blake, who gets her first goal for the afternoon. Back to a 2 goal difference, 3 goals to 5. The way of the Dogs. McDowell. Scott Thomas. Stubbs. So Nicole McDowell short. Comes out wide to Stubbs. And now Steph Ferguson gets it to drop and gets it back to 1 goal, the difference. So relatively tight contest so far. Wandin just with a slight ascendancy, but it's pretty much been goal for goal after Wandin got the early break. Meager to Dolphin, looks at Wallmeyer, goes back to George, and they've turned it over here, the Dogs. So Monbulk with a chance to counter-attack. Whitworth thought about Scott Thomas, went to Kelly. She finds McDowell. McDowell back to Kelly. Kelly to Scott Thomas. Back to Kelly, so the boxed him in pretty well here. Wandin. Stubbs looks around, decides to come back to Kelly. Scott Thomas eventually gets him inside the attacking third to McDowell. Here is Perry Reid. Beautifully done by Kimpton. No, pulled up for contact. So Perry Reid could potentially level the scores here if she shoots truly, and she does. 5 goals to 5. And Nicole McDowell has the centre pass, and the game suddenly back on an even keel. Stubbs, long drive, beautifully done to Ferguson. Won't pull the trigger yet to Perry Reid. Comes out wide. Here is McDowell. McDowell. Stubbs got up at the right time. Short one to Ferguson. McDowell. Reid got it. And Perry Reid puts Monbulk in front for the first time today. First lead change of the preliminary final. 6 goals to 5 the way of the Hawks. So Wallmeyer to Dolphin, straight back to Wallmeyer, looks to go back to Dolphin, comes back to Kimpton. So George straight to Wallmeyer. Good feed to Meager. Will she line them up? Yes, she will, and gets the game back on an even keel. 6 goals apiece. McDowell. Stubbs waits, and she's taken too long. And so Wanda will force a turnover. They've done that well. So Ruby Tid, short to George. Laterally to Kimpton. Back to Maddie George. Dolphin. George for about a third time of this passage. Cleverly done. Good work rate by Carly Dolphin. Got it back from Kimpton. She goes back to George. She'll go longer to Meager. Kimpton. Back to Meager. Onto Dolphin. So the Monbulk defence making him work for it. Ferguson gets a hand in, pulled up for contact. Meager eventually gets it under her control, and Amalia Blake just with a bit of a height advantage on Paige Whitworth and gets Wandin back in front. Second lead change for the preliminary final. 7 goals to 6. So Wallmeyer to Dolphin. Into the hands of Maddie George to Carly Dolphin. Meager, beautifully done. And Amalia Blake with back-to-back goals for Wandin. Gets it back out to that 2-goal difference. So the Dogs with the last 3 of the game. Ferguson to McDowell. Laterally to Stubbs. All the way back to Kelly. And now Monbulk will get a look. Yeah, very tight start to this game. And beautifully done. 7 goals to 8. So the Hawks get it back to 1 goal the difference. Can they respond? Wallmeyer, George, back to Wallmeyer. She goes back to Maddie George, onto Dolphin. All the way back to Kimpton. Did well, no, she's turned it over. Trying not to fall into the attacking third, and now the Hawks are on the counter-attack. Here is Ferguson, over the top to Perry, but it had too much on it. And a bit of a get-out-of-jail-free card for Wandin there. So George. Tid, got to be contact on McDowell, it is. George, long drive, beautifully done to Wallmeyer. Meager, Blake. Will eventually get it back out to 2 goals the difference. 7 goals to 9. Nicely done here from Wandin. Stubbs. Long drive, George got a hand to it, but we'll stay with Monbulk, and looks like Lauren Spinks is about to come on for the first time today in place of Kayla Meager. McDowell, beautifully done to Perry Reid. Stubbs, now Ferguson. And Steph Ferguson puts it away. Back to 1 goal the difference, still the way of Wandin. So Wallmeyer to George. Long one to Dolphin. Short to Lauren Spinks. Thought there might have been a contact call there. Umpire didn't see it that way, but it will still stay with Wandin with the ball trickling out of play. Spinks with her first look at goal. And on the second opportunity, she does convert back to 2 goals the difference, 10 goals to 8. So McDowell waits and waits, short to Ferguson. Stubbs to Perry Reid, who's done well in the 1-on-1 against Ruby Tid, and she Doesn't convert. Kimpton gets it under her control and Wandin on the counter-attack again. Kimpton to Tid, on to George, looks at Walmart, comes back to Ruby Tid. Back to Maddie George, out wide to Dolphin. She finds Kimpton. Kimpton, a bit longer this time to Wallmeyer. Wallmeyer standing to readjust to centre bib and play recommences. And turnover here for Wandin. Whitworth. Kelly. Underground one, Kelly. Much longer this time to Scott Thomas. McDowell. Stubbs. Beautifully done to Ferguson. Good feed. Oh, nearly picked off by Ruby Tid. But Steph Ferguson on the second attempt does get it. And gets it back to 1 goal the difference. So pretty tight contest so far in the preliminary final as we start to near quarter time. Dolphin. So play resumes. Dolphin back to Wallmeyer. Short one to Spinks. And Lauren Spinks converts. Back to 2 goals the difference. 9 goals to 11. So McDowell to Ferguson to Stubbs. She'll go laterally. Kelly. McDowell looks up ahead and eventually finds Steph Ferguson, who won't have a look at goal. George got a hand in, but I think she's given away contact. She has. McDowell, beautifully done over the top to Perry Reid. So, another opportunity for Perry Reid. And this time she does convert. Gets it back to 1 goal the difference. So they're still right in the heels of Wandin and Monbulk. Spinks will go back to Dolphin. Dolphin, nicely done to Lauren Spinks, who just feeds across to Amalia Blake. And gets it back to 2 goals the difference, 12 goals to 10. With quarter time fast approaching. Stubbs. Eventually it falls for Scott Thomas. She goes out wide to Kelly. Long drive, way too much on it. And Wandin will be on the counter-attack. Tid, Wallmeyer. Dolphin gets under control. That is quarter time. And the Premier Division A grade preliminary final between Wandin and Monbulk. And a fairly tight contest so far. 12 goals to 10 are the way of the Dogs. We'll head off to a break for quarter time, and when we come back, we'll bring you all the action from the second quarter. And welcome back to Gembrook Recreation Reserve for the second quarter of the Premier Division A grade preliminary final between Wandin and Monbulk. Currently just 2 goals separates the sides. There's 12 goals to 10 the way of Wandin. Or 11 goals to 12 according to the scoreboards. It's Matty Wallmeyer with the centre pass and second quarter action underway. Good long drive into the hands of Dolphin. Knocked out of Lauren Spinks' hands. So back into the hands of Carly Dolphin. The short option is Lauren Spinks, and that's where it goes. And she converts. So 2 goal difference. The way of Wandin, 11 goals to 13. McDowell to Ferguson. Stubbs. McDowell laterally to Ferguson. Comes back inboard to Stubbs. Waits and waits. Offloads just in time to Ferguson. Wallmeyer got a hand in. It's going to stay with Monbulk. Ferguson. McDowell will run onto it. And straight to Perry Reid. This to get it back to 1 goal the difference, and Perry Reid converts. 13 goals to 12. Wallmeyer to Dolphin to George. Pulls the trigger to Spinks. Comes back inboard to Wallmeyer. And Amalia Blake gets one back for Wandin. So 14 to 11 reads the scoreboard. Ferguson, Stubbs. Out wide to McDowell. Good clean take. Back to Sophie Stubbs. Stubbs. Contact against Spinks. He goes short. short. Beautifully done. Here is Steph Ferguson. Here we go. So Wandin force another turnover. Tiered out wide to Kimpton. Kimpton, long drive onto the hands of Dolphin. Spinks back to Dolphin. Contact against Kelly. And Lawrence Spinks, good feed. And Amalia Blake to make it 4 goals the difference for Wandin. And she's got it, 15 goals to 11. And they just start to stretch out the gap. Wallmeyer. So Matty George onto Dolphin. Dolphin, short feed to Spinks. And 5 goals the difference, and she does. That's all right. So McDowell, Stubbs. And beautifully done. Steph Ferguson needs to convert here, and she does. Gets it back to 4 goals the difference, 12 goals to 16. Still the way I wanted. A bit of work to do for the Hawks, but not letting it blow out too much just yet. Spinks, long drive to Dolphin, and here is Amalia Blake. And she converts, 17 goals to 12. That's going to be the tricky one for Monbulk, that matchup on Amalia Blake. Kelly eventually gets it under her control. Goes out wide. Sorry, Scott Thomas, in fact, to Kelly. Long drive from McDowell to Ferguson. And beautifully done to Perry Reid, who's missed. And Ruby Tidd picks it straight off. Waste no time onto Matty George. Out wide to Kimpton. Kimpton moves it on to Wallmeyer. Wallmeyer, long drive to Spinks. And nicely done to Amalia Blake. And this to make it 6 goals the difference. And Wandin suddenly on a bit of a tear in the second quarter. Really starting to stretch out the lead. Wallmeyer to George. Over the top to Dolphin. And onto Amalia Blake. And she makes 7 goals the difference. 19 goals to 12. So really running away with it now. George gets the hand in. Stays with the Hawks, and Sophie Stubbs sets it up to Ferguson. And puts a bit too much on the feed. And Wandin again can counter-attack, so Ruby Tidd to Kimpton onto Wallmeyer. Wallmeyer retreats back to Ruby Tidd. Long drive. Anyone's ball eventually. Spinks gets under control, comes back to George, short to Dolphin. Dolphin. Wallmeyer, and nicely done over the top. Amalia Blake converts and makes it 8 goals the difference. Wallmeyer, Kimpton, Spinks, and Amalia Blake again. And this is just clinical stuff from Wandin. And make that 9 goals the difference. And Wandin, with all the ascendancy in this game suddenly, it is getting away from Monbulk again. So Matty George out wide to Kimpton. Kimpton onto Wallmeyer. Wallmeyer looks up ahead, decides to go short to Kimpton. She goes back to Wallmeyer. Contact against McDowell. McDowell to Spinks. Dolphin eventually gets it under her control and turn it over here, Wandin. So maybe a chance for Monbulk to get one back. Whitworth. Barnett. Back to Whitworth. Back into the hands of Barnett. Long drive into the hands of Stubbs. Stubbs over the top to Ferguson, who finds Perry Reid. And this just needs to go through, and it does. Eventually it drops. 13 goals to 21. Spinks, Kimpton. Dolphin over the top, and here is Amalia Blake, and she's got it. And just like that, straight back out to 9 goals the difference. 22 goals to 13. Stubbs, Ferguson, out wide to McDowell. And Steph Ferguson, this to get it back to 8 goals the difference, and she's got it. 14 goals to 22. Wallmeyer to George, who provided the run on the outside. Dolphin, Spinks. Dolphin looked at Amalia Blake, but goes to Lauren Spinks instead, and that might just work, and it will. Another goal for Wandin, 14 goals to 23. McDowell to Stubbs. Long drive. Beautifully done to Ferguson. Ferguson Comes back to Sophie Stubbs, goes back to Ferguson. Here is Perry Reid. Back to 8 goals the difference, 15 goals to 23. Wallmeyer, George, that is a bullet to Dolphin. Will go to Lauren Spinks, and then this time over the top to Malia Blake Whitworth. Did she keep it in? No, she didn't. Spinks, Wallmeyer, and here is Amalia Blake. And she'll make it 9 goals the difference, 24 goals to 15. McDowell, Stubbs, nearly picked off by George, but couldn't quite complete the job. And Steph Ferguson, nicely done. Perry Reid puts it through, back to 8 goals the difference. So a lot of work still to do for Monbulk here, with Wandin holding a pretty comfortable lead of 8 goals. Dolphin all the way back to Kimpton. Kimpton onto Wallmeyer. Spinks, Wallmeyer, back to Spinks. And back out to 9 goals the difference, 25 goals to 16. Ferguson, Stubbs. Dewhurst. Barnett to McDowell. And that going to be picked off anyway. Ruby Tidd collects the rebound cleanly off the post. Wallmeyer. Tidd. Kimpton. Short to George. Long drive, beautifully done to Spinks, who had plenty of room to work with. And Amalia Blake takes it cleanly. Make that 10 goals the difference for Wandin. Biggest lead of the game now. Wallmeyer, Dolphin, Blake over the back, make it 11 goals the difference, 27 goals to 16. And this is becoming a bit of a procession here again for Wandin against Monbulk. It's a matchup they've owned all season. Ferguson, not quite for Ruby Tidd, good effort, but just gave away a bit of contact. Comes into the hands of Perry Reid, who gets one back for the Hawks. Back to 10 goals the difference. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done for Monbulk. Wallmeyer out to Kimpton. Kimpton, George did well, nearly cut off by Ferguson, but she got it under her control. Now she goes to Dolphin. Dolphin all the way back to Kimpton. Kimpton thought about Wallmeyer, offloads to Dolphin. Now Wallmeyer gets involved. Dolphin looks up ahead, out wide to Spinks, who spilled it, and it will be turned over. So Monbulk with a chance to counter-attack. Dewhurst with ball in hand. Over the top to Barnett. Whitworth to Dewhurst. So Scott Thomas has moved into the centre. Barnett. Ferguson, long drive, good one as well. Stubbs, nicely done. And good feed. Ferguson. Back-to-back goals for Monbulk. They get it back to 9 goals the difference. And Grace Scott Thomas has the centre pass. So looking to change a couple of things up here are the Hawks. So Kelly comes back onto the court. Stubbs. Oh no. That one goes straight out of play. Ferguson the intended target, but wasn't quite on the same page. So George goes back to Tidd. She'll go short to Wallmeyer. And they've turned it over. Ferguson, this to make it 3 goals in a row for Monbulk, and she's got it. So back to 8 goals the difference. Just had a little bit of a shift of momentum here for the Hawks, but still a lot of work that needs to be done. Wallmeyer to Dolphin. And beautifully done to Amalia Blake, and she will get this back to 9 goals the difference, 28 goals to 19. As we start to near half-time in the preliminary final. Scott Thomas wanted to go to Ferguson. Spinks did well. Wallmeyer mops it up. She'll go short to George Stubbs. Gets a handy but gives away contact. So into the hands of Maddie George. Has got Kimpton out wide if she wants her. That's where she goes. Comes back to George. Taken nicely in the one hand. Long drive. Just had a little bit too much on it. And trickles out of play. So into the hands of Paige Whitworth. So Monbulk on the counter attack. Whitworth Got it from Kelly. Goes back to Kelly. She'll probably go back to Whitworth, and she does. Thought about Scott Thomas. Goes longer to Stubbs. Stubbs inboard. Eventually Barnett gets it under her control. Maddie George gets the hand in, but ball will not stay in play. Stubbs. Ferguson. Nicely done to Scott Thomas. Back to Ferguson. Wallmeyer. Beautifully done, Maddie Wallmeyer. Or maybe not. Maybe not. So Monbulk eventually will get their shot at goal and get it back to 8 goals the difference. 28 goals to 20. It was hard work, but they got it in the end. Wallmeyer to Spinks. Over the top, and Whitworth picks it off. Here we go. So the Hawks on the counter-attack again. They've got to make something of this. Ferguson looks around, holds off. Barnett out wide to Kelly. Kelly, Stubbs, lost control of it. Wallmeyer does well. Picks it off. Goes short to George. Back to Tid. Back onto Maddie George. Onto Kimpton. Kimpton to Wallmeyer. Wallmeyer. Oh, George has got to run onto this. Can she keep it in play? Yes, she can. Crucial that. Dolphin. And beautifully done, Lauren Spinks. Gets one back for the Dogs. 20 goals to 29. Scott Thomas. Ferguson. Stubbs out wide. Does it well. Scott Thomas. Kimpton. Don't quite know what happened there, but in all of that, the Hawks do get one back as Kayla Meager comes back onto the court for Lauren Spinks. George goes out wide. Sort of pulls it short in the end to Wallmeyer. Wallmeyer gets it back from Meager, retreats to George. George. Dolphin, beautifully done over the top to Amalia Blake, and converts on the second opportunity. Back to 9 goals the difference, 30 goals to 21. Stubbs. Does it well. Here is Perry Reid, who should get one back for the Hawks. Back to 8 goals the difference. Still a lot of work that needs to be done, though. So Wallmeyer. George. So Stubbs pulled up for contact. George to Kimpton. Meager, beautifully done, and here is Amalia Blake. And back to 9 goals the difference, 31 goals to 22. So a bit of a change here for Wandin. Claudia Semmels comes into centre. Ruby Tidd in the meantime with ball in hand nearly for Sophie Stubbs. Maddie George wastes no time. On to Semmels, who gets involved for the first time in the preliminary final. Dolphin just got a bit of contact. Carly Dolphin out wide, and this might work out if Whitworth can keep it in play. She can, but she's turned it over, and now Kayla Meager won't look at goal. Malia Blake will. Whitworth can't pick it off, and there we go. And that is half-time here in the Prem Division A grade preliminary final. 32 goals to 22. It's a 10-goal break for Wandin at the main change. We'll head off to a break now for half-time. When we come back, we'll bring you all the action from the second half. And welcome back to Gembrook Recreation Reserve for the second half of the Prem Division A grade preliminary final. We are underway once again. Claudia Semmels for the centre pass. Meager out to George. Kimpton back to George. Puts him inside the attacking third to Meager. And the Dogs have turned it over. So maybe the Hawks can cut into the margin early days in the second half. So Whitworth with ball in hand. With that tough matchup against Amalia Blake. Oh, gee, Blake nearly picked it off. Scott Thomas eventually got the ball under her control. McDowell's done pretty well there. Pass wasn't particularly favourable. Stubbs, long try. Ferguson on the end of it. We'll go back to McDowell. McDowell wants to put it up for Perry Reid, and it's turned over. Reid got hands to it. Ball trickles out of play. So Tid to Kimpton, back to Tid. Semos goes laterally to George. Moves it forward to Dolphin. She'll come back to Ruby Tid. Dolphin. George. Thought about Semos and back to Matty George. Kimpton, long drive. Dolphin. Semos, good feed. Whitworth nearly picked it off, but Amalia Blake eventually gets it under her control, converts the goal and makes it 11 goals the difference. 22 goals to 33. Ferguson all the way back to McDowell. Back to Ferguson. Oh, through the hands of Perry Reid, and not the start for Monbulk. Very good start though for Wandin. So Kimpton, Tid, George, Dolphin, long drive and just had a bit too much on it. Would have been some kind of feed though. Scott Thomas to McDowell. We'll go back to Whitworth. Whitworth looks up ahead but comes back to McDowell. Long one, Mega gets a hand in. Fucking hell. Kelly. Scott Thomas to Stubbs, offloads. Kelly got up at the right time. The wind playing a bit of havoc early days in the second half. Ferguson beautifully done over the top to Reid. And she will get one back for the Hawks. Still a lot of work that needs to be done though. So 10 goals the difference reads the scoreboard. 23 to 33. Still the way of Wandin. Semos to Dolphin. Back to George. And then back to Dolphin. Looks up ahead. Will go short to Mega. So George up to the transverse line. Semos, Dolphin, good feed. Here is Kayla Mega. And straight back out to 11 goals the difference. 23 goals to 34. So McDowell over the top, nicely done to Ferguson. Ferguson holds up, comes back to Stubbs. Stubbs looks around, does it well. Scott Thomas. Stubbs, long drive, and picked off beautifully by Ruby Tid. George back to Tid, this time onto Semos. Semos, George for a third time in this passage, wants Dolphin, that's where she goes. Oh, sorry, Kimpton it was, in fact. Long drive, now comes into the hands of Mega. Dolphin over the top, and Amalia Blake takes it clean. They got contact from Whitworth as well for her troubles and makes it 12 goals the difference, 35 goals to 23. And it's really becoming one-way traffic now. Semos to George. Looks around, eventually finds Dolphin. Dolphin all the way back to Kimpton. Kimpton just took a bit too long. So something going right there for Monbulk, but still so much work to be done to get themselves back into this game. Nearly picked off by Dolphin. Eventually though falls to McDowell. Comes out wide. Scott Thomas. Ferguson eventually gets it under her control. Stubbs. Good feed. And Perry Reid eventually converts. 35 goals to 24. Stubbs. Long one. Matty George. No. That would have been something quite brilliant if she'd pulled that off, but wasn't to be. Ferguson to Perry Reid. And gets one back for the Hawks. Back to 10 goals the difference. 25 goals to 35. Another opportunity here for the Hawks. They could potentially make it 3 goals in a row if they can convert off this. Kelly, Scott Thomas, laterally to Stubbs, looks up ahead. Ferguson gets to the front. Back to Scott Thomas, short to Stubbs. Has McDowell up ahead, but goes out wide to Ferguson. Ferguson, wind really picks up, and Perry Reid in between Kimpton and Tid takes it cleanly. Converts. 3 goals in a row for Monbulk. Back to 9 goals the difference. McDowell with a centre pass. Maybe this might be the resurgence for Monbulk. Ferguson. Out wide. Oh, Semos nearly picked it off. It stays with Monbulk. But the wind really playing havoc. You'd see the way that ball deviated through the air. Ferguson. And they've turned it over again here, Monbulk. Kimpton, long one, Dolphin. Mega needs to convert, and she does, just to get a steadier for the Dogs. Back to 10 goals the difference. Wallmeyer back on the court and has the centre pass. Dolphin, George, over the top. Nicely done to Maddie Wallmeyer. Here is Mega. Steps up to the plate and this time gets one back, 37 to 26. So McDowell. McDowell, underground, nicely done. Stubbs looks up ahead. Reed can't take it cleanly. Tid picks it off and wanted on the counter-attack. Dolphin, Wallmeyer, back to Dolphin. Back onto Wallmeyer. Dolphin for a third time in this passage. Megan, Dolphin for a fourth time. Comes back out wide to Wallmeyer. And there we go, converts the opportunity and straight back out to a 12-goal difference just as the Hawks are starting to mount a comeback. The Dogs deny it. Wallmeyer to George. Back to Wallmeyer. Goes long. Finds Mega. Mega laterally inboard to Dolphin. Onto Amalia Blake. And this will make it 13 goals the difference. 39 goals to 26. Ferguson. Stubbs. McDowell. And there we go. They've turned it over again of Monbulk. So Ruby Tid, short to Kimpton. Kimpton out wide to Wallmeyer. Wallmeyer, Tid, back to Wallmeyer. So George, good long one to Dolphin. Dolphin comes inboard to Wallmeyer. To Mega. And she converts. 14 goals the difference now, 26 to 40. And Maddie Wallmeyer again with a centre pass. And Wandin with one hand on this grand final spot. The Hawks do force a turnover. McDowell, Wallmeyer did well, got the hand here, but Stubbs recovers it for Monbulk. Ferguson out wide to McDowell, looks up ahead to Reed, decides against that eventually, that is what she does, but they've turned it over again, Monbulk. Oh, God. So George got it from Tid, back to Tid Wallmeyer, bit of contact from Ferguson. George onto Wallmeyer, Wallmeyer back to George, this time to Annie Brown, who comes onto the court for the first time. Kimpton to Wallmeyer, back to George, Brown, bit of contact against Kelly. So Brown, Wallmeyer, Kimpton, Wallmeyer. Goes short, Mega, over the top, and here is Amalia Blake. And they force the turnover here to the Hawks. Whitworth to Barnett, McDowell. Call for stepping, so it's going to come straight back. So Maddie George, short one to Wallmeyer, Wallmeyer to Mega, and then back to Wallmeyer, and here is Amalia Blake. Makes it 15 goals the difference, 41 goals to 26. Three-quarter time fast approaching. Stubbs eventually gets it under her control. Comes back to Kelly, onto Barnett, thought about Ferguson, Mega, gave away contact. Barnett to Kelly, so Lauren Spinks will come back on for Kayla Mega. Stubbs looks around and Perry Reid with front position on Ruby Tid needs to convert here and she doesn't, and Ruby Tid cleverly done off the post. Kimpton to George, back to Ruby Tid, goes out wide to Wallmeyer, Tid again involved onto Kimpton, Kimpton nicely done to Wallmeyer, onto Spinks, back to Wallmeyer, George through hands, and they've turned it over here, so well done McDowell, got it off the hands of Kelly, onto Stubbs. Monbulk moving this ball very quickly as well. Ferguson, Stubbs. Ferguson out wide to McDowell, couple of 1-2s, and eventually Steph Ferguson gets it under her control, and she will not convert, and Ruby Tid, no, not quite. And there we go, back to 14 goals the difference. So they get one back, the Hawks. Wallmeyer, long drive from Annie Brown into the hands of Spinks. Comes back out to Wallmeyer. Wallmeyer looks up ahead to Blake, decides against that for the moment. Tries to go underground and Here we go, they've turned it over, Wandin. So chance for the Hawks to counter-attack. Whitworth, Barnett, up the line. Matty Warmeyer has done well enough. So beautifully done, Matty Warmeyer comes back into the hands of George momentarily to Kimpton, over the top, beautifully done to Brown. She'll come inboard to Spinks, back to Brown, over the top, and here is Amalia Blake. Straight back out to a 15-goal difference for Wandin, 27 goals to 42. Stubbs, beautifully done. Ferguson comes out wide. And Perry Reid will get one back for the Hawks. Back to 14 goals the difference, 28 goals to 42. Spinks to Warmeyer. Cross to Brown. And finds Amalia Blake, who can get it back to 15 goals the difference, doesn't convert, so Monbulk can regain possession. Whitworth to Kelly, through hands of Amalia Blake, but Whitworth eventually gets it under her control, goes long, that'll work out to Kelly, onto Barnett, took it cleanly in the one hand. Ferguson looks up ahead. This will stay with Monbulk for the moment. McDowell, Ferguson, comes out to Scott Thomas, who's moved into centre. And now on to Steph Ferguson, who gets one back. There we go, back to 13 goals the difference, 29 goals to 42. So back-to-back goals for Monbulk. Scott Thomas, McDowell. So Matty George and Lawrence Spinks both taken out of it. McDowell, is it too long? It is. There we go. So back into the hands of Ruby Tidd. Fires a bullet to Warmeyer. Did well to take that cleanly. Wouldn't have been easy. So Tidd to George, onto Kimpton. Kimpton, this time to Brown, onto Spinks. Goes out wide. Nicely taken there by Warmeyer. As Claudia Semmels comes back on. In place of Matty George into wing defence. Whitworth. Kelly. Scott Thomas to Barnett, looks up ahead, goes with a long drive. Ruby Tidd gets front spot on Sophie Stubbs and again picks it off. Wandin on the counter attack. Brown goes out wide, beautifully done. Spinks, and here is Amalia Blake. Back out to a 14 goal difference for Wandin, 43 goals to 29. Semos brought forward, Warmeyer knocked away by Scott Thomas. And nicely done by Matty Warmeyer. On to Lawrence Spinks, who does convert. 29 goals to 43 reads the scoreboard. McDowell, long drive, that is a bullet, picked up beautifully by Kimpton. Warmeyer wastes no time, onto Brown, over the top to Lawrence Spinks, who'll just pull the trigger to Amalia Blake. She's got it. And Amalia Blake puts it away. There we go. 15 goals the difference. 29 to 44 with three-quarter time not too far away now. Warmeyer. Spinks, Warmeyer. And onto Amalia Blake. Make that 16 goals the difference now. New biggest lead of the game. 29 goals to 45. Ferguson. Kelly eventually gets it under her control. And that will do us for three-quarter time in the Premier Division A grade preliminary final between Wandin and Monbulk, and the Dogs keep their stranglehold on this game. 16 goals they lead by, 45 to 29. We'll head off to a break now for three-quarter time. When we come back, we'll bring you all the action from the final quarter. And welcome back to Gembrook Recreation Reserve for the final quarter of the Premier Division A grade preliminary final between Wandin and Monbulk. It's the Dogs by 16 goals, I believe it is. It's Matty Warmeyer with the centre pass as the Dogs go inside the attacking third, early days, and Lawrence Spinks converts the first opportunity of the last quarter. And 18 goals the difference reads the scoreboard, 47 to 29. Ferguson, long drive, McDowell. Just had too much momentum going the other way, and Wandin forcing another turnover. Ruby Tid, Walmire over the top. Semos assess the options. Here is Kai Kimpton now. Long drive. Spinks laterally to Walmire and on to Kyla Meager, who will make this 19 goals a difference, 48 goals to 29. And the Dogs just continue to pile on the pain here for Monbulk. Brown, Meager, Walmire. Goes short. Nicely done to Meager. Meager goes out wide to Brown. And here is Lauren Spinks, who's in goal shooter for this last quarter. Potentially just going to put Amalia Blake on ice. So 20 goals the difference now. McDowell. So Ruby Tid getting a hand in. Probably going to stay with the Hawks. And clever there by Steph Ferguson. Into the post. Collects the rebound. Gets the goal. Back to 18 goals the difference. 30 goals to 48. Walmire out wide to Brown, back to Walmire, on to Meager. Meager assesses the options as Walmire hits the deck. Meager knocked away. Meager nearly picked off. Is it by McDowell? No. And now Kayla Meager, this to push it to 20 goals the difference, 30 goals to 50. McDowell to Ferguson. Back to McDowell, is it? Walmire gets a hand in, but stays with the Hawks for the moment. So this is Ruby Tid. Kimpton did well, held strong. Walmire does well to Semos. Semos back to Walmire, looks up ahead, beautifully done to Kyla Meager. Make that 21 goals the difference for Wandin, 51 goals to 30. And they've just about booked their place into next week's grand final. Walmire, bit of contact against Brown, or against Kelly in fact, so into the hands of Semos. Semos. Brown, Walmire, short to Spinks, who will line them up and gets one back for the Dogs. 22 goals the difference, 52 goals to 30. Barnett, who's gone into centre. Ferguson over the top to Stubbs. Stubbs. Nicely done to Perry Reid, who will get one back for Monbulk. Back to 21 goals the difference, 52 to 31. Kimpton out wide, got it from Walmire. Brown up and under ball, eventually falls for Meager, puts it up for Spinks, and it trickles out of play. So the Hawks can counter-attack. So it comes out wide to Whitworth. Whitworth back to Scott Thomas. Does it well, short. Whitworth on the end of this one, looks up ahead. Doing well to find Ferguson, eventually gets under the control of the Stubbs. Back to Ferguson, on to Perry Reid, and maybe back-to-back goals coming up here for Monbulk, and Perry Reid converts. 32 goals to 52. Another turnover here. Semos, Meager, nearly picked off by Barnett. Spinks in the meantime. We'll get another look at goal. And Lauren Spinks eventually converts. Back to 21 goals the difference, 53 goals to 32. Back into the centre, Wallmeyer, Meager, back to Wallmeyer. Will go short, Brown. And is it going to be picked off, is it? No, eventually Spinks gets it under her control and puts it away, 54 goals to 32. So Claudia Semmels off, Maddie George back on. So Kelly, back to Whitworth, who called for it and gets it. Ferguson triggers out a play. It's going to come back into the hands of Wandin. So Ruby Tid, Perry Reid, beautifully done. No, must have just trickled out of play. So Ruby Tid will get a second go at it. George up the line to Brown. She'll go to Kimpton. Kimpton back to Brown. Laterally to George. Brown for a third time in this passage. Meager back to Brown. Whitworth, can she pick it off? No. And Kayla Meager converts, make that 23 goals the difference, 55 goals to 32. Dolphin has gone into centre. George and then Meager and on to Spinks, make this 24 goals the difference for Wandin. Really just pushing it out now. Stubbs, oh Kimpton, how about that interception? Brown, back to Kimpton, over the top to Meager, she'll go to Dolphin. Dolphin will look to feed to Spinks and there we go. So Monbulk do get one back. Whitworth. Up to Stubbs. Stubbs looks around. Barnett back to Stubbs. Stubbs inboard, finding Ferguson. Barnett again over the top to Ferguson. Can she get it to... No, she'll go out wide to Stubbs. Steph Ferguson gets one back for the Hawks. 33 goals to 56. George, Wallmeyer, Meager. Can Dolphin keep it in play? She cannot. Good effort, but probably just try to be a little bit too cute in the end. Scott Thomas, back to Kelly. Whitworth eventually gets it under her control. Nearly picked off by Dolphin. Good long drive. Stubbs gets her hands on it. That is a bullet. Nice hit under Ferguson. Feeds to Reid. Nearly for Ruby Tid, but Perry Reid this time will convert. And gets back to 22 goals. The difference 34 to 56. Steph Ferguson makes it 3 goals in a row for Monbulk. 35 goals to 56. So Dolphin with a centre pass to Spinks. So Malia Blake back on the court now as well. And back into goal shooter and Amalia Blake back into the goals. Back to 22 goals the difference. 57 goals to 35. Ferguson fakes. George picks it off. Does she know? So back into the hands of Sophie Stubbs. And George this time does pick it off. No contact call from the umpire that time. That is a bullet, beautifully done, into the hands of Spinks, onto Malia Blake, and this will be 23 goals the difference. 58 goals to 35. Dolphin, Spinks, Wallmeyer. Good feed, and Amalia Blake gets it right back out to 24 goals the difference, 59 goals to 35. So Claudia Semmels comes back on. I think Maddie George might be done for the day. I'll put her on ice and make sure she's right to go for next week. Brown, Dolphin, and Amalia Blake with front spot. Puts it away. 24 goals the difference, 25, in fact 60 to 35. Dolphin, Blake, long drive. Well, she got it from Wallmeyer. This to make it 26 goals the difference, and Amalia Blake makes no mistake. Biggest margin of the game. Perry Reid. 61 goals to 36. Spinks. Oh, Amalia Blake does. No. Collected's going to be a turnover. Barnett, short. And so another turnover. Wandin will be able to counter-attack again. Brown. Goes out wide. Here is Kimpton. Kimpton back to Brown. And that will work out for Amalia Blake, who will get it back to 26 goals the difference, 62 to 36. And this is starting to become a bit of a procession for Wandin. They've absolutely dominated this game. Goes out wide. Stubbs to Reid, who can maybe get one back here for the Hawks, and she does, 62 to 37. Dolphin. Nicely done. Carly Dolphin gets it back and goes on to Lauren Spinks, who pushes it straight back out to 26 goals the difference, 63 to 37. Barnett back to Whitworth. Contact called against Blake. So they waste no time here to the Hawks. Ferguson just pulls the trigger to Reid, who doesn't convert on the first opportunity, but does get a second look and will convert on the second. There we go. Back to 25 goals the difference, 63 to 38 the way of Wandin. Spinks, the look away pass is a good one to Brown. Wanted to pull the trigger to Blake. Eventually Carly Dolphin does. And Amalia Blake right back out to a 26 goal difference for Wandin, 64 to 38. Barnett, Ferguson and Perry Reid all on their own. Will get one back for the Hawks, back to 25. It is Wandin's day. They are through to this grand final. There's only minutes left to go in this game, and they can just relax now and enjoy the last parts of this game. And just coming off the hands of Blake, so the Hawks can counter-attack. Maybe another consolation prize or two on offer, but it's going to be too much to overcome. Spinks forces the turnover. Amalia Blake will get it back out to 26 goals the difference, 65 to 39. And this has just been a domination from Wandin. They've owned this matchup throughout the season, and this is going to be the biggest victory yet. Dolphin gets it under her control. Short to Kimpton, over the top to Semos, to Brown. Dolphin looks up ahead, won't pull the trigger just yet. Now she does. Goes longer this time to Blake. This to make it 27 goals the difference. Can Spinks get it under her control? No, she can't. Picked off by Kelly. Scott Thomas back to Kelly. Short to Barnett. Wants to go to Stubbs. Goes out wide to Whitworth. Whitworth looks up ahead. Long drive. Good one as well to Ferguson. Ferguson. Stubbs. Over the top, and Perry Reid eventually gets it under her control. Won't have a look at goal. Steph Ferguson, though, will. And doesn't convert that one. Will convert the second, though. 65 to 40. Back to 25 goals the difference. So Dolphin. Yeah, Monbulk do force another turnover, so they'll be on the counter-attack again. Ferguson, Stubbs, Kelly all involved. Will it be kept in play? No, it won't. So stays in possession for the Hawks. Stubbs, good feed. Here is Perry Reid. She can make this back-to-back goals for Monbulk. She can get it back to 24 goals the difference, 65 to 41. Ferguson to Barnett. Out wide to Stubbs. And that will do us in the Premier Division A Grade Preliminary Final. And Wandin through to the Grand Final in convincing fashion to the tune of 24 goals. 65-41 is the final score. And they will take on Mount Evelyn next week. Played him in the semi-final just 2 weeks ago and lost by 1 goal. They'll be looking to change the result of that game. So congratulations to the Dogs through to the grand final. Don't forget, at 2:20pm we do have the footy between Wooriallic and Alinda Creek, which will be live through the local footy hub and also Yarra Valley FM 99.1. So thank you for tuning in and goodbye for now.